Good morning, everybody. It's great to welcome you to the Understanding Dairy Opportunities UAE webinar. It's good to have you with us. My name's Lucy Randolph. I'm the Senior Export Manager for Dairy for AHDB. We've got some exciting topics to be chatting about today, most notably the Defra-funded Promar report, which is on food and drink in the UAE, and most specifically here for the dairy sector. Plus, an on-the-ground look on the UAE from Adil from the Department for International Trade. And we will also get to hear from the new Defra Food and Drink Counsellor, Lorna Berdunova from Defra. It's nice to see we've got quite a few numbers coming in. Hopefully that usually goes up as we get going. But I just need to do a little bit of housekeeping, if that's okay. You will all be staying muted throughout the webinar. Webinar is due to finish around 11:30 a.m. So please ensure that your laptops are plugged into a mains power source. There will be a formal question period at the end, so feel free to ask questions whenever you like. You can do this by opening the questions panel on the right-hand side, and you can also use this to raise any technical issues you might be having with the team. We will be doing the question period at the end, so if you do have any questions, please just, as we go along, do just type them in, and I'll make sure that hopefully we can ask them at the end of the webinar. And you will be prompted to do a survey at the end of the webinar. Please do take time to complete this. It's really important for us to make sure that we do sort of target this content to you guys. Before we start with the speakers, I just wanted to sort of talk about AHDB's role in this. So we're actually the levy-funded organisation, and my aim is to support and raise the profile of the British dairy sector for the exporters. We're 4 years into this strategy, which consists of 3 markets at the moment. This would be North America. So at the moment, that's the USA and Canada. Now, Canada, obviously, things may change there with the Brexit, and the cheese quota situation will be quite badly affected by that. So that is a sort of watch and see pot at the moment. We're also doing the Middle East, as these webinars are noting, and then Greater China, what I call Greater China, which is China, Hong Kong and Singapore. We'll be introducing a new market, was supposed to be this year, but now will be next year, which is looking to be Vietnam, which is quite an interesting new one. The way that we do this is generally through trade shows. So we do group stands at trade shows. We're there to sort of support and enhance the sort of British dairy presence. Do it through event promotions, chefs events, meet the buyers, and networking events. So this is all to sort of support and enhance what you guys are already doing in these markets. Obviously, in these difficult times, we're having to sort of be much more nimble in the way that we and flexible in the strategy. We're facing challenges going forward, and we need to have a sort of quite a robust way of supporting all of you guys to enhance the offering. So this is one of these ways. We're doing a Middle East week at the moment. This webinar today. We've also got the webinar on Thursday, which will be a webinar looking at Kuwait, Saudi Arabia and Qatar. So please do feel free to sign up to that. It should be quite interesting. Also alongside this, we're running a series of virtual Meet the Buyers. That's going on throughout this week. We've got seven buyers and over 30 meetings happening due around this week. We will also be running the Food and Hotel China British Dairy Stand, which we do every year. However, this year will be slightly different. It's a much more reduced participation in conjunction with our meet colleagues at AHDB, and will actually be run with thanks to the Department for International Trade, whose on the ground staff will be manning the stand for us and actually out there flying sort of brand British dairy at the show. I think it's important that we are still out there, still showing that we're out there to do business. And then in February, fingers crossed, and I'm hopefully hanging my hat on this one, there will be Gulf Food in February, looking to do the British dairy participation stand. In previous years, we've had anything from 4 to 6 companies on our group stand. And we're hoping this will go forward. But as I said, this strategy is having to be pretty nimble at the moment, and we're having to change with the times as much as possible. Please do contact me directly if you would like to discuss this any further, if you have any specific questions that you'd like to ask, and please do let me know if there is anything that I can do in this situation. So on to our first speaker, I'd like to introduce Adil Khan. He's the Trade and Investment Advisor for the Department for International Trade for the UAE. Adil, on to you.
Thank you, Lucy, for that. Morning, everybody in the UK. It's the afternoon for us here in Dubai, in the UAE. And thank you all for joining this meeting today, this webinar. And as Lucy mentioned, this is part of our Middle East Dairy Week that we're running. This is the first time we're doing a virtual one-to-one session and a webinar, and a couple of webinars included. The first one is today, and as Lucy mentioned, the second on the 10th. So thank you very much for all of that. And my thanks to Lucy as well for working with us. We've been working together, AHDB and DIT in the UAE, to make sure that we connect our UK suppliers to buyers in the UAE. We've done that at the previous Gulf Foods, and with the times that we're facing right now, we thought it would be good to run a virtual event. And for the last 2 days, I think we've had about 16 meetings already, and we expect another 20 odd meetings to be done in the next 3 days. So really going very good. As Lucy mentioned, I lead on the food and drink sector at DIT, based in Dubai at the British Embassy, and I work with British companies to help and support them to do business in the market. Could I have the next slide, please? So just a quick overview about DIT in the Middle East. DIT is broken up into 9 regions, and we are part of the MEAP one, which is Middle East, Afghanistan, and Pakistan, which is headed by Simon Penny, our trade commissioner. We are well over 100 people in the 12 countries in DIT, so we're well placed to assist UK suppliers to do business in the market. And as you can imagine, so DIT really, our main role is to promote British products and services across the world. For us, of course, in this region, and we ensure that you take advantage of opportunities open to us in the MEAP region. Again, as we all know, the UAE is an important element of the Middle East. It is the most developed country in the Arab Gulf. Its economy is only second to Saudi Arabia. And value of UK exports to the UAE in 2019 was £12.1 billion, which was about literally 14% above 2018. Next slide, please. I just wanted to quickly touch upon market access issues which we faced during COVID, and we've been very active in making sure that we have worked with the local authorities to ensure that UK products have not suffered in terms of access to this market. So just a quick indication, these are not the only ones we worked on, but certainly food and drink faces a lot of trade barriers in the market, and we worked with the authorities here to ensure that our products came in without the mandatory Arabic labeling for the three-month period, which is really, really effective and very helpful to our exporters. We've also lobbied successfully for the UAE to accept our export health certificates via email and scanned copies, and this is still ongoing even at this point in time as we speak. And halal certificates are being accepted via QR codes. So these are just a few examples of what we're doing on market access issues. So we don't just do trade promotion, we do trade policy, we work on market access issues, trade barriers, to make sure that our products from the UK flow into this market with as less a problem as possible. And we're in regular touch with our ministers are talking to each other quite regularly. Our senior management team here, which comprises of our ambassador, consul general, and the trade commissioner, are in regular touch with the senior figures that matter in the UAE. I for myself, I'm in regular touch with authorities such as Dubai Municipality, the Ministry of Climate Change, ESMA, and ADAFSA in Abu Dhabi, to ensure that we have good working relationships, to ensure that we are able to access them if required to resolve any issues. Next slide, please. Just a quick overview about the food and drink sector in the UAE. As you can see, the UAE still imports a very large amount of its food requirements, which is literally 85 to 90%. Our exports in 2018 were 360 million pounds. And as you can see, also, we're expecting a very large, there's a large opportunity for food and beverage sales during Expo, and that's the kind of amount we're looking at for overall F&B sales during Expo 2020. And we are well positioned to ensure that UK companies take advantage of that and actually get a large chunk of that business in to UK companies. I just want to quickly also mention that UK food products are very well respected and liked in the market. That's because provenance is an important element, and it influences people's choice, especially in the post-COVID era. A survey by Barclays Corporate Bank in the very recent past found that 62% of UAE consumers have the strongest association of quality with British brands, and food tops the list, with about 22% of those that polled said they were willing to pay more for British food products. So it certainly is in a good position. When it comes to things like organic food, free from healthier options, again, the UK is known to be in the forefront of developing these kinds of food products. Again, very well liked, and I constantly hear from distributors and retailers asking me for these kind of products from the UK. In 2017, UK ranked 33rd in terms of quantity of food items imported into Dubai, but was at the number one spot for number of imported items. So that just gives you an indication of the diverse range of products that the UK provides to this market. Because although we are sort of 30 plus in terms of the amount of food imported, we're number one in terms of the diversity of products that come into this market. Next slide, please. Just a quick bit about the DIT bounce back plan, which was launched in June along with Defra. I'm sure most of you would be aware of this already, but if not, please have a look at that link which I've mentioned in the template, which gives information about all the activities and support available to UK companies to help them export in all over the world. There's the virtual MTB, as you can see, as one of the things. And what we're doing this week in terms of the Middle East Dairy Week is exactly that. We've made sure that a number of you are doing one-to-one meetings with local buyers, and we intend taking that forward in terms of how we can, depending on how it goes, we will look at duplicating that in the coming months. You also hear from my colleague after me, who's going to be the new agri-food counsellor, who's going to be based shortly in Dubai. So I won't sort of take away anything from her and let her talk about that. But generally speaking, there's a lot of support available to the UK food and drink industry, and please feel free to get in touch with us or have a look at the site at the link to find out more details. Thank you. Next slide, please. So DIT assistance to UK companies comes in many shapes and forms. So I've just given an indication of what we do. just as we're doing today with this webinar and the Middle East Dairy Week, where we're doing the one-to-one meetings. We have an Agri-Tech webinar, which is taking place tomorrow, which is part of the London Tech Week. I'm working with AHDB colleagues for British lamb promotion. And again, that could be a virtual meeting or a visiting trade mission, depending on how things pan out in the market. There was going to be a seafood webinar in November. And of course, Lucy mentioned Gulf Food, which is the largest annual food event in this part of the world. And in 2019, we had 300 plus one-to-one meetings between UK exhibitors and local buyers. Earlier this year, in Feb 2020, we had 400 plus meetings taking place between UK suppliers and exhibitors. And by all, I mean, we've got all indication that the 2021 event is also going ahead physically. And if that happens, we're looking to probably do 500 plus meetings in Feb 2021. And that's because we're looking to bring in buyers from India, the wider Middle East, China, and possibly some African countries as well. We are also going to be having trade missions coming from the Northern Powerhouse, from Midlands Engines, from Southwest of England, and I've just yesterday been contacted by colleagues in London who also want to bring a trade mission. So it's going to be a massive set of UK companies coming in, and we're looking to support them in every which way possible. We work very closely with our colleagues from SDI, Invest Northern Ireland, and the Welsh government as well, and therefore support companies from across the UK. Next slide, please. This is just a quick comparison of UK exports versus the ones from some key UK EU states in terms of dairy exports for 2019. I just wanted to kind of give an indication of where the UK is on butter, cheese, and milk powder. And as you can see, we do quite well on the cheese sector, being second only to France, which is quite expected. Again, milk powder, you can see Germany is really big, but again, I think all indication is that a lot of that comes in for ship chandling and for re-exports. Butter is a commodity product. The UK doesn't necessarily do much of that, but we do pretty well on cheese. Just to give you an indication that of the top imported food groups in 2017 coming into Dubai, dairy products was on number 2. And within that group, whipping cream was first, cheddar cheese was second, yogurt was third, mozzarella cheese was the fourth, and powdered milk was the fifth. Next slide, please. I want to quickly touch upon the UAE regulations that affect dairy and milk products. Again, I'm sure a number of you must be aware of the Emirates quality mark that was introduced by the authorities in May 2019 for dairy and milk products. And those are the specific categories that are affected by the Emirates quality mark. What this means is that any of the products that fall under those categories need to apply for, register for the Emirates quality mark. So all the products that come in need to have the Emirates quality mark on their labels before they are allowed into the market. Next slide, please. So just to continue with that, so it was introduced by ESMA, which is the Emirates Authority for Standardization and Metrology. They're responsible for standards across all sectors in the UAE. And the EQM is not new. It was introduced for mineral water before it was introduced for juices and dairy and milk products. ESMA has appointed these 3 notification bodies that can work with companies that need assistance with navigating and completing the EQM registration process. Once completed, the certificate is awarded for 3 years. And the fees that I mentioned there are indicative. So please don't sort of take them as set in stone because the 16,000 dirhams that I mentioned as ESMA registration fees is per product category. What that means is if you have products that fall under 2 different categories, for example, then the ESMA registration fees would be 16,000 multiplied by 2, and so on and so forth. If your products are manufactured in different factories, which have different categories, so it all works out based on your product categories. The document fee, label review fee, etc., is charged by the notification bodies. Again, that is something depending. It all depends on the number of categories, SKUs, factories, etc., and that can be discussed with each of the notification bodies. Anybody needing assistance with any of these notification bodies, or in terms of contacting them, please get in touch with me, and we can help you with that. Next slide, please. And finally, I just want to quickly talk about selecting a distributor, setting KPIs for them in the market. Again, this is just from my personal understanding of the sector and having worked in Dubai and in the sector. So I just thought I'd put down a few pointers which might help people who are looking at this market. It all depends on what category you're looking for to bring in your product, whether it's retail or food services or both. So when you're looking at a distributor, you need to be clear what kind of a distributor you're looking for. What should their strengths be? If you're looking at retail, then what part of retail trade do they serve? Again, if you're looking at food services, which chain of hotels they serve? Do they have a dedicated sales force, key accounts, etc., etc.? And again, your own products. Do they sell themselves in terms of they're well known? Does the consumer need educating, marketing, brand building, and how you would effectively form that partnership with, say, your distributor in the market? And when you're setting up the KPIs with a distributor, again, some of the key things to keep in mind are things like the launch plan. How committed are they to your brand? Do they have any competing brands in the same category? Frequency of store distribution. A very important thing is what kind of infrastructure do they hold? Do they have the storage facilities, the capacity, distribution vehicles, and call frequency and outlets by sales personnel, multi-channel distribution. Again, another very important thing is how the finances are. What kind of state of finance are they in? So again, this is not. I'm sure most of you are aware of this and do sort of have a checklist of these sort of KPIs. But I thought I'd just put in what I'm aware of and what certainly would help. Again, things like innovative mindset. Are they able to adapt to changes quickly? For example, during the pandemic, some distributors, were able to sort of, adapt and change and move quickly, whereas the others couldn't really, and they suffered badly, and therefore the products that they represented suffered badly in the market. So I mean, there's those kind of things, of course. But again, at the end of the day, please do speak to us. Let us know what your plans are, who you're speaking to, and we might be able to give you some tidbits about the distributor, or we could possibly connect you with the right set of organizations that you should be speaking to. So really, that's me, and I'm not touching upon the cheese sector and the market for that specifically, because Caroline is going to be doing that later in the presentation. But yes, those are my contact details, and please do get in touch with me if you need any assistance in the UAE. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adil. That was great. Thank you so much. That was really interesting to know that we're a second biggest category in the market. So that's fantastic. If you've got any questions, do write them below, and obviously we will be taking them at the very end of all of the presentations. So moving on, I'd like to introduce the new agri-food counsellor, Lorna Berdunova from Defra. I think she's only been in the job a couple of months, so we'll try not to be too hard on her today. And over to you.
Thanks, Lucy. Good morning, everyone. So I'm Lorna Berdunova. I joined Defra in July, as Lucy's just said, as the new Agriculture, Food and Drink Counsellor for the Gulf region. And I'm delighted to be part of this event. It's my first event in this role, and to be able to introduce myself to you all today. Before I started this role, I've been working in roles across government related to food and drink for the last 10 years or so, and I'm looking forward to using my knowledge and experience from these to help grow exports of UK food and drink to the Gulf region. As Adil has already touched on, in June this year, in response to the impact of COVID-19 on the food industry, and after consultation with industry stakeholders, Defra and DIT announced what is known as the Bounce Back Package. It's a plan of measures to support businesses who are looking to grow trade activity overseas, and particularly to expand their trade activity overseas to help recover from the impact of COVID. The food sector is an important sector within the UK economy. It's the largest manufacturing industry in the UK and has a huge number of SMEs as part of it. It's been significantly impacted by COVID, as I'm sure you're all aware, and the government is committed to supporting businesses throughout the supply chain as they recover from this. At the bottom of this slide, which I think you'll receive after the webinar, is a link to the gov.uk page, which has full details of the Bounce Back Plan. If you'd like to find out more, or feel free to contact myself or Adil, and we can give you more information. So can I have the next slide, please? So the Bounce Back Plan is made up of 8 measures, which are listed here. I won't go through all of them, there's more information on the website. These include the creation of export champion roles, where experienced exporters will provide guidance for businesses looking to start exporting. The expansion of the current Defra Food is Great campaign into new countries, with the UAE being one of the first countries for this. The introduction of a programme of virtual events, such as the ones that are being run this week, so including the Meet the Buyer events, which Adil has touched on, and webinars such as this, as well as some more virtual events with hampers of food being sent around so that you can introduce your products to new exporters. And most excitingly for me, the announcement of my role as the first agri-food counsellor for the Gulf. The next slide. So my role is due to be based in Dubai at the British Embassy. It's serving the UAE and the wider Gulf region. And as Adil has already said, both the UAE and the wider Gulf region are really exciting markets with lots of opportunities for UK food and drink producers. Lots of existing opportunity and lots of emerging opportunity with the increase in interest in health products, organic products, and items such as these. So the main focus of my role is to support the UK food and drink sector, both companies who are already exporting and those looking to expand to the region, or maybe to pick the UAE as the first country they wish to export to. And I will be doing this through a combination of government-to-government engagement, so speaking to governments in the region to try and work out issues on market access or trade barriers, working with my colleagues such as Adil across the region in all of the embassies throughout the region, and colleagues back in the UK to support exports, look at market access barriers and other trade barriers. I also will be looking at identifying specific opportunities for growing UK food and drink exports across the region, such as the ones that we're discussing here today. The next slide, please. So before I hand over to Caroline to discuss the opportunities in more detail, I'd just like to give you a little bit of background on the report. So this report is it's part of a series of in-market reports which were commissioned by Defra. They aim to assist industry to better understand the opportunities for food and drink in each of the countries looked at, as well as some of the details of the export process within those countries. So where there are specific issues or schemes that you have to follow or ways of doing business. The full report for the UAE will be published this autumn. It will be available on the great.gov.uk website. And if you go to that website, if you've not been to that before, you can also find further information about exporting, as well as a list of upcoming events which may be of interest to you. So that's all from me. Please feel free to get in touch with me if you have any further questions, and I look forward to working with you in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorna. I'm sure most of our girls will be in touch with you. They tend to be a vocal lot, so they'll definitely be in touch, and be interesting to see how this works. This role works within the region. Moving on now to Caroline Dawson. She's the head of agri-food for Promar International, and she'll be talking to you about the Defra report. Thank you, Caroline.
Lovely. Thank you, Lucy. Brilliant. Thanks very much. So, yes, I'm Caroline Dawson, Head of Agri-Food for Promar International. If you'd like to move on to the next slide. So a little bit of introduction, and I think Lorna's handed me over quite nicely in a sense and sort of touched upon it. But we were commissioned by Defra probably 12 months ago now, sort of October 2019, to undertake a sort of series of sort of market research studies. So we undertook a comprehensive study in the UAE, but we also did similar work over in India and also in the US. We've also been commissioned as well when sort of COVID allows to undertake a similar study in China, which potentially could link into a future webinar with AHDB. But the work was commissioned by Defra, and once that was commissioned, we undertook some really comprehensive desk research. So between sort of November and January, we worked on sort of drawing up a list of products. So the products that we looked at over in the UAE were biscuits, seafood, sauces and condiments, bread and pastries, confectionery, and the one that I'll be touching upon today will be cheese. We were in country, so we all travelled over. My colleague John Giles visited UAE, and we were over there in February and March of this year, which was sort of pre-COVID. But we'll touch upon that and some of the implications with COVID at the end of this presentation. But the presentation really is a summary of some of the key points of the work we undertook in the UAE. And again, that full report will be made available. It was, I think, 200 odd pages that we sent over. So it's very detailed, very comprehensive. And I'm hoping that it will give you a flavour today of some of the information that we managed to collate. So next slide, please. So our approach, and I suppose just to set the scene in a sense of what we did, we used a semi-structured topic guide, which is basically a sort of a questionnaire, a set of questions developed in conjunction with Defra. We work with also AHDB, with DIT, and some of the other devolved food and drink organisations across the UK. And we went over to country, we carried out a series of business-to-business interviews. So we spoke with importers, distributors, retailers, food service. We spoke right across the supply chain. And just looking there and focusing on the UAE, we undertook 25 interviews in country. Along with those interviews, we also undertook some detailed store audits. So again, in the UAE, we visited 5 of those different stores, which I'll touch upon a little bit later in this presentation. Next slide. Next slide. Thank you. So just to set the scene, and I know Adil, he shared sort of the values of the exports that are coming over into the UAE, but to understand, I suppose, the population and the market potential, the population of the UAE is 9.6 million, which in sort of terms and putting it into context is similar to the size of London. You've got that then sort of broken down. So you've got the likes of Dubai, which is 3.3 million, 3.2 million in Abu Dhabi, very popular tourist destinations. We hear about people visiting them there on their holidays. But it is worth noting 60% of the population are Southeast Asian expats. So you've got to think about, where are food products and what they're going to be targeting. It's in the region of 100 UK expats, which has dropped slightly over the last couple of years. I think it was in the region of 125,000, but it has dropped down slightly. Again, picking up on the tourist element, there's in the region of 500,000 UK tourists, plus the other global tourists that come over. There's a highly wealthy Emirati and provenance and sort of linking into luxury and premium brands, which a lot of the UK products tick those boxes. Cruise ships, so again looking at the figures over the last few years, there's in the region of 700,000 plus sort of tourists that have entered the port of Dubai. That was last year, and obviously with COVID things are changing slightly. It's a major international hub for air transport, so I think it's the 5th largest sort of airport in the sense of the traffic that comes through it in the world. So it's 88 million passengers and opportunities there in terms of in-flight catering, etc. In terms of the retail sector, and just to give you a flavour, and just sort of picking out the biggies really, but you've got Carrefour there, Lulu's, M&S, so they have actually 12 food outlets over in the UAE, Waitrose, and they've had a presence over there since sort of 2008. And they've got 10 stores which are very sort of pro-British in terms of their product offering, the Spinneys, and also Choitrums, which is very much linked to Tesco. Next slide. So what does the market look like, and drilling down that little bit further, well, just picking up what I said again about the sort of highly wealthy Emirati and sort of, you know, the sort of pro-British sentiment sort of starting at the top of the country. There are very strong links back to the UK. You know, there's a lot of UAE travel into the UK. You know, they like London, they like Union Jacks. You know, there's links back to sort of, you know, the education. So there's a very close sort of network and a link there that brands can build upon. The UK influence in the UAE retailing is strong, so you could see that in the supermarkets. They were very much similar to what we have here in the UK in terms of their feel, the products they were offering, the promotions, the packaging. You know, it was all, you know, supermarket setups that we are familiar with. There's a very strong and positive enabling environment over there, a buoyant food service sector, particularly with the hotels and restaurants, and linking back into the tourism. The food and drink products are widely available. So, you know, you went into those retailers that I've just mentioned, you know, it wasn't unusual to see UK products. And tariffs essentially are 5% for everyone, so right across the board. I know I was over in India and doing some work over there, and it very much fluctuated from sort of 50–60% up to 150%, but it's very accessible in terms of the tariffs. So the 5%, with exception of the Gulf Cooperation Council, which are the sort of immediate 6 countries adjacent to UAE, which has a 0% tariff. Next slide. So moving on to cheese, and cheese was one of the products that we focused on. But in terms of total cheese imports into the UAE, back in 2009, it was in the region of 44,000 tonnes. And then the data, when we were undertaking the study, I did see sort of Adil, it's got some of the 2019 data, but when we were undertaking this, we had sort of 2018 available to us. That had grown to 73,000 tonnes per year. But just to put it into context, the UK is still relatively modest. So again, back in 2018, it was in the region of 2,400 tonnes, though that has increased from sort of 10 years earlier. So it has almost doubled, up from 1,200 tonnes. Most of the UK exports, so the UK products that we saw out there, it's cheddar cheese, it's mild cheddar cheese product, generally from established UK processors. There are some sort of minor exports and more sort of specialist exports of things like goat's cheese, speciality cheeses like Stilton's, which are sort of present on some of the deli counters. Familiar names, so we're probably all on this call aware of the likes of Wyke, Grandma Singleton's, Delamere Dairy, etc. So there are, you know, well-known brands out there that are, you know, that are doing okay, and you know, are getting a good shelf presence and recognition. Next slide. So here it's just really to highlight where sort of UAE imports of cheese are coming from, and this is more of a global, so it's building on Adil's graph that he had earlier of the EU supply into the marketplace. But in terms of the market, around 50% of the market share, and if you look at sort of 2018 there, is sort of encapsulated by Saudi Arabia, the USA, Denmark and Egypt. So those 4 countries are the real leaders. You can see the UK there, they're in the bright blue at the top of the bar chart there. But as you can see, it just highlights that growth in terms of the imports and how that has risen over the last 10 years. Next slide. So just to drill down a little bit further and to understand sort of market share and volumes, You've got the likes of Saudi Arabia, which are adjacent to UAE. They have 0% tariff. The majority of the product which is coming through Saudi Arabia is coming through Fonterra. So they have a huge manufacturing site over in Saudi. They've been established in the marketplace for around 30 years. And it's not only cheese, it's other sort of dairy products and dairy ingredients that they put into the market. So they are the leading players in that market share. In terms of products, and it's interesting to look there and see the products that are coming into country, but it's very much focused around the sort of the processed cheeses, mozzarella cheeses, so you know, eating out and sort of targeting the sort of Italian, you know, the pizza, the pasta markets. We've got the UK there at the bottom, and again it is mainly the cheddar, the mild cheddars, which are entering the market with a market share of 3.3%. So we'd like to go to next slide. So again, it's just highlighting what we've just picked up on the previous, but the demand for cheddar cheese, it's the mild product that everybody was after, and what the real demand was in the marketplace, followed by mature and vintage. If you would like to move to the next slide. So here's a few shots of some of the products actually on the shelf. So you've got the likes of Wyke there, which we mentioned, and I've got some of the pack prices that I can share with you, but the likes of a sort of a 200-gram pack of Grandma Singleton's sort of mild cheddar cheese was RRPing for the region of £4.13. There was a Lycross Organic Red Leicester for 200-gram pack, £6.09. Goat's cheese, 150 grams, you were looking in the region of £7.30. And then some of the Stiltons there that you can see in the centre deli counter, they were retailing for the region of £22 per kilo. But just to give you a flavour of what the retail prices were. But you can see there's a mixture of sort of pack sizes, pack options and product offerings. The UK products are on the deli counter sat next to French products, so a number of the likes of Waitrose had the sort of speciality cheese counters, which is very familiar to what we have here in the UK. Next slide. This is more of a typical store layout in terms of the processed cheeses and pre-packed cheeses and soft cheeses. So we'd like to look at the next slide, please. So moving on to demand, supply and packaging. So as we've mentioned, the vast majority of demand in the UAE is for cheddar cheese. It's for mild varieties, and they tend to be favoured due to their highly price competitive nature. There are a number of UK cheese processors already in the UAE market. So there were 6 or 7 companies identified as being active. And the cheese that we looked at in the UAE were available in 2 formats, which were mainly the 200 to 400 gram pre-packs, primarily for the retail sector. And that was then next with the 2.5 to 5 kilo blocks of the food service customers. So they're the more catering pack sizes. Next slide. So in terms of competition, and just drilling down a little bit further and understanding who are the main competition for the UK. New Zealand, so again, they're a very competitive, primarily sort of cheddar, mild cheddar cheese supplier into the UAE. They're made via Fonterra, so they've got the links there backing through. Australia, they've got, again, a very well-established supply into the UAE market. And again, they provide a supply of cheddar and mozzarella cheeses. France, they have a wide range of French cheeses, and they tend to be sort of higher end and more specialist cheeses where you see them in the deli counters. They have a very high reputation, and UAE sort of favour them in terms of their high quality. Next slide. The MENA and the GCC countries, so we touched upon that just before, but the import to those countries, they're generally 0% tariff. They are the processed cheeses, very mild cheddars. So they tend not to be in direct competition with the UK products, and they are very, very competitive in terms of price. The UK, so the research that we undertook, there was 7 suppliers that we noted, but there are potentially more out there. There's a good deal of competition from the UK market, so you'd be competing against other people wanting a slice of the pie over there. But there were other cheese types beginning to get shelf space, so there was products such as Red Leicester starting to appear next to the cheddars. There's a strong degree of price competition between the UK suppliers, and there is limited loyalty against sort of key UAE buyers. Next slide. Ireland is actually relatively small in terms of supply of cheese into the UAE. They are much stronger with other dairy exports. Much of their sort of other exports is sort of butter and other dairy ingredients. There seems to be a bit more of a presence and a growth there, and they are keeping an eye on the market, but it is very much price dependent. The US exports a full range of cheeses, and they do have a lot of support from the US Dairy Export Council over there. They ran sort of a number of campaigns and different sort of shelf presences. But they have things like cream cheese, mozzarella, right through from food service to on the shelf retail. They were particularly strong with the food service. The UAE importers are more interested, they felt, though, with other markets. The US was more interested in perhaps other markets, so that may potentially open up some opportunities moving forward. Next slide. So in terms of how the UK firms get to market, and again, Adil picked up on this, and it would certainly recommend sort of working closely with the likes of DIT and the UK embassies located over in the UAE. But it would be, really trying to identify a good exporter and consolidator, based either in the UK, and there were a number actually that were appearing to be in the Netherlands that the UK suppliers were using as a channel through into the UAE. Air freight links are excellent, so there's in the region of 11 flights a day that come from the UK into the UAE. Also sea freight links are very regular, and it takes in the region of 14 to 28 days for products from the UK to enter UAE. So short shelf life tends to be shipped by air, longer shelf life and potentially cheese could be shipped by sea. Again, promoting what Lucy said and getting involved really with Gulf food, and crossing fingers and toes with COVID that it is happening next year. But again, having a presence there, many of the sort of importers that we spoke with, saw it as a very sort of important place to be present at. In the region of 100,000 visitors. I think last year in 2019 there was about 80 companies represented across different food sectors in the UK. But also importers in the UAE also tended to visit shows such as Sial, Anuga, US Fancy Food, etc. So they are sort of looking for interesting, new, innovative products that they can add to their portfolios and work with you in accessing those markets. So next slide. So how do UK firms get to market? Well, many UK companies have already been doing business in the UAE for some time, so it's established, it's trusted, it's understood, and with the likes of DIT over there, there's access and help for you to able to test those markets. One thing that from some of the interviews that we had, and in particular the likes of Waitrose, but being an existing supplier can help. So if you are, for example, already putting products into Waitrose in the UK, maybe that next step to sort of Waitrose in the UAE, it can help, and it does look sort of favourable for you. They do like to look at the track record of success in the UK, so it is a key indicator. So products that have got an established shelf presence or into food service here in the UK is potentially looked upon more favourably than ones that are really cold and new to market. UK food companies are sealing, have got a good reputation, they're good to deal with, and sort of well known, sort of dealing with the UK retailers, sorry. But they tend to be a little bit weaker in other routes to market, so maybe more of the independents. In terms of business, it's pretty standard, so as international trade, but they were starting to sort of tighten up pre-COVID. And patience is everything in terms of UAE, and I like some of the work we did over in India and in the US. You really need to be in there for the long haul, so thinking about a solid 3 to 5 year plan, thinking about in-country presence, promotional offers, activities, not just sort of sending shipments out cold, thinking about that real support package that goes with your brand, your product, to get the recognition and understanding that it requires. In terms of sort of the top routes to market, when we were looking, high-end retail was the real place where UK products were targeting, followed by sort of high-end food service. It's also worth noting as well that potentially once in the UAE, you could use it as a sort of a platform, as a springboard, where you could access other sort of Middle East and Eastern countries. So using it as a sort of a stepping stone really to go that little bit further. Next slide. So what are the lessons for the UK in the UAE cheese sector? Well, the UK is recognised as a key supplier, even though it is relatively small in terms of market share. It's very much respected. It's a high quality product that retailers and consumers trust over there. It is potentially, it's a small market, but it has the potential to grow further. There are a number of UK suppliers already chasing a rather sort of limited market in a sense, but there are always opportunities, and in particular with food service, there's areas there that I feel that could be grown. The UK does face strong competition from other EU producers, so again, just thinking about the tariffs, that 5%, it's across the board with everybody. So France, they do a particularly good job, but you've got then the likes of sort of New Zealand, Australia, where their production costs can tend to undercut us, and they can get product out to market in larger volumes and at lesser cost than what we can at times. As with other British products, cheese producers have done well, particularly in the UK sort of influenced retailers. So again, we've seen them in Lulu, Spinneys, Waitrose, M&S, and even in the French sort of owned Carrefour. There's UK products out there. But the UK has tended to do less well in the non sort of traditional routes to market. So yeah, I think food service and sort of the HoReCa sectors, there's potential there to perhaps develop that little bit further and explore some new opportunities. Next slide. So in terms of COVID, and we had to sort of look at this after we'd undertaken our study really, because everything we had done looked very positive and shiny and buoyant, and it was all pre-COVID, and as we were writing up, COVID happened. So just a few sort of considerations and things to think about, but sort of the longer term impacts perhaps on the food and drink sector, and particularly with the UAE. It's oil prices, it's one of the key drivers in terms of the economy. So you've got to think about sort of consumer spending, and even in a relatively wealthy country, things can, be volatile and move up and down. The UAE is very dependent on food and drink imports. And I know they've got a sort of food security is one of the sort of key national priorities for the UAE. So there's always going to be a demand there. There's looking at word around sort of shortening supply chains and sort of stress testing sort of routes to market. One of probably the biggest hit in terms of COVID is the demand of food and drink for the food service sector. So hotels and restaurants, it's likely to remain subdued, certainly for the remainder of this year and looking into next perhaps. And travellers are a little bit wary, so that element perhaps that there is going to be a knock on there, and also sort of the airliner and cruise liner travel, numbers there have already decreased for this year, so it's seeing what's going to happen with that potential market over the next year or two. There's been a huge rise, as it has here in the UK, in terms of home delivery systems, online ordering technology. You know, they've both increased in popularity, so it's working with some of those retailers to look at getting UK products through those platforms. I don't think, perhaps early COVID days, there was issues with transport links, and particularly with shipping and containers, and where products you know, were being held up and bottlenecks, but that seems to have eased now. But the commercial and trading environment will invariably tighten up, and will remain so, I think, for the sort of forthcoming months. So next slide. There we go. So thank you very much. As I say, it's a very sort of whistle-stop tour of the Defra report that we covered in an awful lot of detail, and that will be made available sort of later on this year in autumn, sorry. But if you would have any further questions, or if there's any areas there that you'd like some more detail, I'd be more than happy to share some of our further findings with you. But no, thank you very much for listening, and I'll hand you back over to Lucy.
Thank you, Caroline. Yeah, that's great. Really, really interesting. I think we've got quite a few questions that have come in. Can I ask all the speakers to turn on their webcams and microphones, and then we can hopefully get started on the questions. Great. Right, we've had a few questions come in prior to the event, so I'll probably start with those, if that's okay. We've had one from Infinitely International. What are the certificates required for dairy exports in UAE? Quite a general question, I believe, and I think it obviously depends on the product, but if you'd like to take that one, Adil, or?
Sorry, that was on mute. Yeah, so as certainly for dairy products, as I said, one of the new things, if you're a new exporter to the market, then you certainly need to consider whether your product would attract the Emirates Quality Mark registration process. So if that's the case, then certainly that would be an important element for you to look at, and because you will need to get an Emirates Quality Mark for your products. If your product falls in one of the 6 or 7 categories that I mentioned in my presentation, then you'll need to make sure that you have to start the process, and it doesn't necessarily have to be that you only export once the process is finished. In our discussion with ESMA, the local authority, we've convinced them that once the company starts the process and your application is online, then you can start your exports. But Emirates Quality Mark is certainly an important element. Other than that, is the usual certificates that might be required, export health certification, and sort of packing lists, etc. when you're exporting, and again, your distributor or retailer will be able to assist you with those things. I mean, you can always get in touch with us and we can assist you, but certainly when you're working with a distributor or retailer, they'll be able to tell you exactly what's required.
Great, thanks. We've actually got a couple of specific questions for EQM. I think Nicola from Omsco has said to confirm that EQM is not required for cheese imports.
I don't know. I don't think it's for cheese imports. I think it's specifically for Laban and sort of other yogurt, and yeah, I don't think there's cheese involved there. But just to be absolutely clear, it all depends on what your barcode is, what homogeneous code you're exporting under. So it's always best to just check that it does not sort of fall under the EQM requirement. And again, if you want to send me the details, I can check and reconfirm and come back to you. Great,
thank you. And a question about UAE milk powder imports. Is any of this for baby formula? How big is the powdered milk market versus fresh milk market in the region?
I had some indication. I mean, I don't know about the region. Certainly, I can't answer that. When I was doing a little bit of research for this webinar, I did find, and I think one of my slides does mention some information about milk powder, and there is skimmed milk powder and whole milk powder. That is how they look at the market. and certainly Germany is, exports a huge amount of milk powder to this region. The UK not so much, simply because a lot of that is also used in the manufacture of long shelf life milk, the UHT milk, by the majors like Laknor, Rawabi, etc. So they do buy a lot of that to produce long shelf life milk for the market. But I couldn't right away tell you how big the market is. Certainly not very big for the UK, because I think that's the smallest sort of in terms of the volume is the smallest as far as the UK is concerned. If you look at butter, cheese, and milk powder, so or probably the second. So, but I can I can try and find out some details if there's a specific requirement on that, and provide some details outside of this webinar. Yeah, again, if you get in touch with me, there's a specific requirement and what is it you're looking for, then I can sort of certainly assist you there.
I've had a question in about if your company has the necessary certification via one customer, do you also need it for other customers, i.e. distributors? I
mean, I'm assuming this is the Emirates quality mark, or this is registration of your products coming into the UAE. So once the product is registered on the UAE system by either Dubai Municipality's FIRS system or the ZAD system, then anybody can import that product. So it doesn't have to be registered by different distributors if they're all bringing it in. So once it's registered, once a particular SKU is registered, that's it. Then anybody can import that into the UAE.
Fine. Okay. We've just had a couple of sort of statements in from, I think, a fairly experienced exporter. I think it's just in response to Caroline's presentation. I think one of them was the question of financials for Middle East companies is important as the data is often not available, I think was mentioned. Plus, I think we mentioned limited loyalty of buyers. And Tim from Lycos Farms has said that hasn't really been his experience. He said they're, fairly loyal. And then the third question from Tim from Lycos is, so 3 to 5 years plans are out of the window due to COVID. People have to be extremely flexible in their approach. I think so, reinforcing what you've been saying.
Yeah, no, they've certainly got to be flexible, and for us it was really challenging and unfortunate the timing of this, because we sort of went out into country and everything was looking really buoyant and everybody was looking forward, and then bang, COVID came in just as we were writing up. So in terms of probably how things are sort of reflected now, in terms of how we're presenting things, to if we were to go out and do that study now, and certainly if we were to go out to China, I think things would look very, very, very different. And in terms of what the next 3 to 5 years will look like, and working with a plan on that front, it's going to be challenging. And so it was just unfortunate in terms of the timing of this report that it happened when it did. But
have you had any update from the region about obviously their reliability on imported food, and with the sort of advent of COVID, have they got any plans to sort of change that approach because they're so reliant on it?
Well, UAE, it fundamentally imports a lot of those products. It's a sort of net importer when it comes to food and drinks. So there's always going to be that demand. And I suppose that there are elements where it can provide a few more products, maybe a bit more in a sort of self-sufficient way, but it's always going to be reliant on imports. And it just depends. I think the biggest impact is going to be that food service sector in terms of the tourism. In terms of the population, with the expats, that are still working and that are out there. There's still going to be an ultimate demand in retail, but certainly for the food service, that's going to be the one that's going to be hit the hardest there. But yeah, there's always going to be a demand for products to be imported into the country.
If I may jump in there as well. I mean, certainly the UAE is the only country in the Middle East which has actually appointed, not because of COVID, but this has happened for, I think she's in place for about a year and a half now. So pre-COVID, they've appointed a minister for food security. So certainly they realize that their dependence on food imports is massive, and therefore there is actually a minister for food and water security in the UAE whose key objective is to ensure is to understand how they can sort of lessen their dependence on food imports. Of course, they've got a very long way to go, but certainly they are looking at it from the viewpoint of how they can probably grow some basic crops in the market, whether they can look at setting up farms, how they can bring in technology to help their farmers, and those kind of things. And again, we are working with the ministry and local authorities, and with Lorna coming in here as well into Dubai soon. That's another area that we're focused on. So we're looking at both aspects, the actual agriculture aspect and the actual end products of food and drinks, and what might affect. But we don't expect to see any major impact to the imports of food items in the near future, really.
Okay. There's a couple of questions here about, sorry, bear with me just a moment. Yes, it's about the mild cheddar side of it. So it was mentioned that it's due to competitive pricing. Is it a consumer taste preference for mild, or is it based on price, or is it because of a more, or would they, sorry, bear with me, is consumer taste preference also more for a mild rather than a mature cheese flavour? Is that why that, you know, mild cheddar seems to be the most successful in the region?
Yeah, I think it's down to sort of consumer choice, so, and also the sort of versatility of it in terms of how it can be used in so many different forms. So yeah, there's an element of the two. I think that there's an element of, you know, consumer versatility and obviously price. You know, it's one of those cheeses that can be made, you know, in terms of the process of making that particular cheese, it can be turned around, it can be put into market quite quickly over some more of those sort of maturer sort of vintage types of product. There's a lot more of it out on the market. There's, you know, in terms of sort of price setting, I know I'm just sort of going back now with some of my notes, but in terms of you know, that there is a sort of a weekly auction sort of held every 4 days, which sort of looks at sort of setting the prices with cheese coming into market. So on that front, it's I'd say it's a little bit of both, but in terms of, yeah, it's consumer preference in terms of the product that people are sort of demanding, in a sense.
Right, thank you. And do all the products need to be halal registered? That's a question that's just come in.
Not necessarily in the dairy sector, but if any producer wants or says that the product is halal, then they must get a halal registration from the UAE. You don't have to get halal registration for dairy products, but if you claim your product to be halal, then you must get the halal sort of certification to travel with the product.
And well, from my experience as well on the cheese side of it, there are sort of two ways. As long as it's obviously vegetarian cheese and it's vegetarian, etc., then, you know, obviously that seems to be fine with the majority of the buyers. The other thing as well that has come up a couple of times that we haven't really thought about previously is things like, you know, a cheese being washed in alcohol, etc. That's another one to look out for as well. Those, even though, you know, it's minuscule, that is also something that can be an issue in the market. So that's my.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, just to give an example, and, you know, just to say, to kind of sort of an analogy, if I may, all cheese products or shipments probably do travel with export health certificates. So in the not very, I mean, we actually currently just finished dealing with say, you know, fish exports from the UK into the UAE, where farmed fish could, you know, the UAE wants, you know, export health certificates to claim or to mention or to state that farmed fish has not been fed with any pork related food items. So that again took a lot of time for us to kind of set it into practice. But I haven't heard something about the alcohol kind of washed cheese related issues come to my attention either by the authorities or any supplier saying the product has been stopped because of that specific reason. But if that happens, then again, that's something we'll have to look at.
I think it's just being upfront about it, isn't it, really? Yeah. A couple of questions for Defra in there, although I won't totally put them on Lorna, as she's only a couple of months in. So one of them is, does Defra have plans to provide direct support for exporters on issues such as creations of the new export health certificates?
In terms of where a product needs a new EHC that doesn't exist?
Well, there's new export health certification. So are Defra going to be, do they have a sort of helpline, or is there somewhere that they can provide support for when they're, obviously these companies are filling out the new certification?
I'm not sure if there's a helpline, but I can look into it and get back to you.
That would be great. Yeah, thank you. And there's another question for Defra. Are UK plans for Expo 2020 back on track and shortlisting UK suppliers for the UK Pavilion food and drink offering? Probably
so
for you go.
Sorry, Adil might have further information. The plans for Expo are starting to ramp back up.
Yeah, so Expo is back on track in the sense the Expo dates are now confirmed for 1st of October 2021 to 31st of March 2022. Those are the new dates. In terms of sort of introducing UK suppliers to say our catering company that's going to be providing catering services to the UK Pavilion, that's on hold as of now because they've been affected as well post-COVID. So they've kind of gone back to the drawing board. They're looking at stuff in terms of what needs to be done. So I think we will have a more clear picture about that probably in the next month or so. And then we'll be more than happy to sort of, or we will know for sure what the status is. So if you keep in touch with us, we can certainly let you know by the end of October where we are on that in terms of are we back on track with the company, or is it still on hold, or is there something else we're specifically doing with them. But other than that, again, we are regularly in touch with the export authorities out here to again, they've taken a step back as well. They're looking at what their options are, how they've been affected, because all the contracts are being looked at by them. This is, as everybody understands, this is an unprecedented sort of, the COVID has been unprecedented for everybody. So even suppliers that have signed contract with Expo have, taken a step back to understand and see if they can actually supply what they promised to Expo based on pre-COVID requirements, and Expo understands that. So right now they are in that review process, and we are in regular touch with the Expo people out here to understand what that means, how things will progress. So again, yes, do keep in touch with us, and we'll be more than happy to look at how we can introduce you to buyers related to Expo.
Great, thank you, Adil. Helpful to know, actually. A quick question on, sorry, bear with me. Does the UK's exit from the EU from the 1st of January affect the level of tariffs on UK dairy products into the UAE?
Not that I know of or have been told of. I don't think that's going to affect us. I mean, there is 5% duty. There's the Emirates quality mark requirement. And there is a 5% VAT. So we haven't been given any indication. Nobody's even talking about how that might affect. I mean, the only effect it might have is depending on how it pans out for our exports into the EU. If there are tariffs there, maybe people will start looking at the UAE in a bigger way, for example. So I mean, that's that. I can only think about it in terms of a positive as a new market for our suppliers to look at. But in terms of tariffs, in terms of any new tariffs coming into place by the UAE authorities, no, I don't think that's the case. I mean, nobody's talking about that.
Okay, even with Brexit.
No, because Brexit again is not affecting. I mean, it's not going to affect our relationship with the UAE in the sense, they're not going to be putting in any new requirements for, say, UK products coming into the market. If that was the case, we would certainly have heard of it. And everybody, including the UAE, understands that we're just coming out of a very, very difficult stage, which is post-COVID. So even things that they've put into place, this new nutritional labeling issue, Emirates quality mark, they're going pretty slow on that. They're not enforcing it as you thought they would. So they quite understand that. I don't see any reason why they'd initiate any new tariffs for products coming into the UAE from the UK post-Brexit.
Great. I've had a question here. Is registration needed for different brand names?
Registration, I mean, just to get it, understand it correctly, what do you mean by brand name? I mean, is it brand X versus brand Y?
Well, so probably different cheeses come under different brand names, but it would be possibly same cheeses. They haven't actually on that one. Every
SKU. So if it's a 50-gram cheese bar versus a 100-gram cheese bar of the same name from the same factory will need to be registered. Mm-hmm. So certainly, if a 50-gram cheese bar from company X is exactly the same as a 50-gram cheese bar from company Y, they both will have to be registered before they can be imported into the UAE.
Right. So yeah,
it's SKU based. It's every SKU. Absolutely, it's every SKU that needs to be registered.
Great. Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. And private label. We've got a couple asking here about. One of them asking here about private label opportunities for dairy products.
In fact, Lucy, if you remember, we just spoke about that before our Middle East Dairy Week, and yeah, there is growing interest about private label in the market. Absolutely. In fact, there is an event that started off in 2019, I think, for the first time around Gulf food manufacturing that focuses on private label. So private label is something that is being looked at by the UAE across various sectors. Of course, I think the pandemic has again affected that, but certainly, there is interest in sort of looking at acquiring products that can be branded for various organizations. So if you go to a Lulu or a Carrefour, you'll see products being sold under their particular brand name. So there'll be Lulu cheese or Lulu whatever, Carrefour whatever. You see that with Waitrose and all those organizations anyway. And a lot of the local retail organizations are also keen to look at that. So certainly it's a growing market, and there is interest in that. And we are certainly looking at how we can look at understanding how we can promote our suppliers on that front. And I'm working with a colleague in the UK on this front. It's very much at the beginning stages, but we're certainly looking at private label as well.
So basically, anybody who's interested in that side of it should really get in contact with you, and you can talk to them about it. And what
yeah, certainly. I mean, happy to do that. As I said, we may not necessarily have all the details right now, but that's an area that we are certainly is one of the key areas that we're looking to develop and understand more of in the market. Yes.
Great. Yep. There's one about halloumi cheese. They're a halloumi cheese manufacturer, and due to the trademark issue, we call it squeaky cheese. From the survey, you can notice that the market prefer the mild type of cheese. So what is the potential for SME to export as halloumi? Is a very interesting cheese to the UAE.
I think one thing that we picked up from food service and from retail, there was a requirement for sort of feta-like cheeses, and they were sort of being produced actually by sort of companies in Denmark, where they seem to have a shelf presence over there. But I'm sure that there would be sort of potential for those kind of products, and the more sort of specialist, higher end retailers. So maybe working with the likes of sort of Waitrose or M&S, looking at opportunities to sort of get in through that potential door. food service as well, looking again, is it sort of starter dishes or salad kind of dishes, what opportunities are there through restaurants and hotels to look at getting those products through. But there are opportunities there, and I think it would be very much, I think, going over and having a look, and potentially looking at attending maybe Gulf Food, speaking to importers, testing out the water and seeing what the market potential is. There's certainly some more research that we could do and look in the background, but yeah, there's got to be an opportunity there, because those kinds of cheeses, there is a market, but it potentially could be quite small.
Great, thank you. I think there's a few comments that come in sort of just answering some of the things we've spoken about. So the halal certification that we've spoken for. One of the guys has said that halal certification is too expensive for the volume of trade for SMEs. So actually it can be cost prohibitive to actually go down the halal certification route unless it's absolutely required. Is that your experience of it, Adil?
Yes, like I said, because it's not essential, and there are suppliers who want to sort of differentiate their product by saying it's halal, and the market, if there's a requirement in the market. But yes, that's correct. There is a cost element to that, because you have to pay for the certification services, and that can add to your overall cost, and therefore make it not very viable for commercial success in the market. And then again, a distributor might not necessarily want to take that on, because the price is much higher for them to distribute and for them to compete with other products. So it certainly is an element that needs to be taken into account.
Great. And I think there was also a comment that vegetarian rennet does seem to be good enough for many of the buyers over there. So that's kind of really,
yeah. I mean, there is exactly. I think there is this trend of looking at vegan, vegetarian, organic, healthy products. So that trend, again, the volumes are not necessarily huge right now, but there is a niche. There's a niche market for that. There is a requirement, and certainly once the food services sector is kind of back on its feet, that again, you'd see that the demand would increase, because in Dubai, food services is an important element of the food and drink sector, because of the huge number of food outlets that cater to the local residents and the tourists that come in. And we've got 195 or different nationalities that live here who've got different requirements. So that again is a market that needs to be sort of kept an eye on, and once the food services sector is back on track, I'm sure that the volumes there will also sort of increase in terms of vegan requirements.
Fine. Right, we've got about 5 minutes left. I've got 3 questions that I'm going to do, and I think then we'll draw it to a close, if that's all right. I've got one here saying, do Waitrose and M&S have buyers based in the UAE, or are there UK offices who do this on their behalf?
That's a good question, actually. I wanted to just jump in and mention that the 5 or 6 main retail outlets in the UAE, so Lulu, Carrefour, Spinneys / Waitrose, which is one and the same in the UAE, because Waitrose is run by Spinneys, Almaya, and who else? And one more, I think, Choithrams. They all have buying offices in the UK, and I deal with them on a regular basis. In fact, I'm supposed to be talking to Carrefour tomorrow, at the Carrefour buying office in the UK, and we make connections, or we introduce UK companies to them on a regular basis. Spinneys, Waitrose has a buying office in the UK. Lulu, which has a huge buying office called Y International, based in Birmingham. So again, we are very well connected with them. We're very well connected with the buyers here. How it works is there's no set rule that the buyers what happens is you may introduce your brand to the buying office in the UK, but the ultimate decision lies with the buyer in the UAE. So the buying office in the UK will send the details to the specific buyer in Waitrose or in Spinneys in Dubai, who will then take a decision, and then they'll decide whether they want the product or not. So in many ways, the decision lies with the buyers in the markets, and the buying houses kind of, you know, are the sort of the wire media to these buyers.
That actually leads quite neatly into one of the things that we've been asked about a showcase. Is there opportunity for a showcase in the UK to some of these guys? Yeah. Is there any possibility to showcase for the products here in the UK? I mean, maybe using the UK buying offices.
I mean, yes, there is. Like I said, you know, we individually we do introduce companies to these buyers on a regular basis, and how that works is if you're interested in, say, selling to Carrefour's 160 outlets that they manage and run in the Middle East, or Lulu's 160 odd outlets in the Middle East. You know, we can introduce you to their buying offices. How it runs is, you know, if you send us your details in terms of what your products are, you have a deck, a brand deck, or details, prices, etc. We send it to these people, the buyers or the buying houses. They look at it and come back to me and say, yes, Adil, we're interested. Please introduce the supplier to us, or we're not interested simply because of X, Y, Z reason. So you know, we kind of we sort of vet that with the buyers and ensure that you know, we get the feedback for the suppliers. And then again, we you know, when I spoke about Gulf Food earlier, when we run our Gulf Food Meet the Buyer events for the last 2 years, we have all these buyers come in. So we had the buyer from the actual buying house in Carrefour attend a meeting in Dubai. We had buyers from Spinneys, we had buyers from Lulu, from Choi Trumps, all of them coming in and sitting and talking to UK suppliers, and you know, so we do that quite regularly.
Great. Okay, that sounds good. And just quickly as a general, there were a few questions that came in about the EQMs. And as Adil has said, do contact him directly, and he can deal with the individual ones. There was questions about fruit juice and yogurts and various bits and pieces, and I think it'd probably be better if you go direct to Adil, and he can probably help you out on anything specific like that. I think this is a good time to draw things to a close. I just want to say thank you very, very much to my great speakers, to Adil, Lorna and Caroline, for obviously presenting the mammoth report that they put together. And please do get in touch with us if you've got anything further. But I'd like to say thank you and have a good day.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.